In this video, we're going to be looking at climographs. So when you talk about climographs, there are two important components. Number one, you're looking at precipitation, and number two, you're looking at temperature. So whenever you're asked to describe a climograph, you're basically asked to describe the climatic characteristics of that area, which means what are the precipitation characteristics and what are the temperature characteristics. So first of all, we have to start by interpreting the climograph, the elements of it. So precipitation, you see that normally it's represented by bar graphs here, and temperature normally is represented by line graphs. Okay, I emphasize the word normally because sometimes the graph switches up. So you must take note of whether precipitation is bar or whether temperature is line. Sometimes graphs can be tricky. For the graph you see here, you will realize other things as well. For example, precipitation is on the left and temperature is on the right. So you must be able to know which side of the graph you're looking at. So in this case, the graph has a primary axis as well as a secondary axis. So for precipitation, so let's look at January for example. January, if you're looking at precipitation, you want to map it to the left, because the left is about precipitation. So in January, this is roughly about 20 mm of rainfall in Hanoi. Temperature, let's look at January again. I should map it to the right. So I'm going to map it all across here. It is about 18 or 17 degrees Celsius. Okay, so temperature, line graph, I need to map it to the temperature line here. Precipitation, bar graph, I need to map it to the precipitation axis here. So look at the axis very, very carefully before you talk about the data. Okay, so beyond that, how do I start describing the graph? You will notice that for this graph here, there are months with very low precipitation. So let me mark this in blue here. You see January, February, March, November, December here. These are months of less than 50 mm of precipitation, so low rainfall. But then you get months in between here, June to September, where you suddenly see an increase in the rainfall. So the rainfall goes from about 200 mm to all the way to about 300 mm. So this tells you that Hanoi has a very distinct dry and wet season in between. The dry season is between November to March, and then the wet season is between June to September. So if you think about it further, a dry and a very wet season tells you that this graph or this place is likely to experience tropical monsoon climate. So the wet season comes in between. Moving on to the temperature. So temperature, what are things that we can take note of? Generally, Hanoi has pretty high temperatures between this range. Okay, about a 10-degree range here. So about 20 or about 17 all the way to almost 30. So the temperature range means you take the highest point, this point, minus the lowest temperature that you see. So this is about 10 degrees Celsius. So another thing you can take note of is, for example, if you average all the temperatures, so you take the data points for every single month, divide it by 12, that would give you your average temperature across the year. So moving on to a different type of graph now. It is still a climograph, but a climograph of London, England. So you would notice similar components. A climograph would have your temperature. It will also have your precipitation. Precipitation is on the left here. Temperature is on the right here. So again, be very careful. Use the legend to help you identify elements of the graph and where to read certain information. So in this case, precipitation is in bar graph. Temperature is also in line graph. So let me try again with January. So January here, precipitation, I'm going to look at the left. So it's about 52, 53 mm. And in January, temperature, I'm going to look at the right. So this is about 2 degrees Celsius. So in January, 2 degrees Celsius in temperature, precipitation about 52 mm. So let's look at the overall picture now. How do we describe this graph? If we look at the precipitation across the year, you realize that all these blue bar graphs here are typically about 60 mm and below. So we know that London, England has consistently low precipitation across the entire year. If I add up all the months' precipitation, I realize that my total annual precipitation is also quite low. Moving to temperature here, I want to look at my temperature range as well. So the highest month minus the lowest month here. So this is about 19 degrees all the way to 2 degrees. My temperature range. Okay, so 18 minus 2, my temperature range is about maybe 16 degrees Celsius, which is much greater than the previous graph that we saw. The previous one on Hanoi is about 10 degrees. This is about 16. Not only that, you realize that the highest temperature here is only 18 degrees. Okay, it's quite low compared to Hanoi. And the lowest temperature, 2 degrees Celsius, is definitely much lower than Hanoi. So if I were to average all the temperatures across these months, I'm probably going to get an average of about maybe 10 degrees Celsius. And that tells you that London actually falls in the cool temperate climate. The temperatures are generally more cooling, much colder than Hanoi, which is in the tropical region. Rainfall, very little, but consistent across the entire year. So use elements of a climograph to help you identify certain temperature characteristics, precipitation characteristics, which then helps you identify the climatic type of a certain place.